Breaking today, an increasingly desperate Meghan Markle flies into the UK. If you believe them.
This is the actual audio of the BOOS that the Harkles received.
King Charles has officially met Meghan, Harry, Archie and Lily.
Charles decided to announce to the world that he had hosted Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and unverified children.
For days, it looked like everything was going wrong for Harry. He stood alone outside court after losing a major case, made jokes that fell flat, and flashed a thumbs up that convinced no one. Meghan was absent, the palace housing dispute was still unresolved, and security worries were leading the news. It all seemed to prove one thing: the trip was falling apart, and any Sussex reunion with the royal family was over before it began. But that version was wrong. While Harry seemed to be taking hit after hit in public, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet were already on their way to Britain. The meeting with King Charles had not been cancelled. It was being quietly protected. That changes how Harry's calm face, smiles, and public gestures are seen. So the real question is whether this was a sincere family step forward or the Sussexes' most carefully planned move yet. To understand the sudden turnaround, you have to see how bad things looked first. Harry arrived in Britain under heavy pressure. His long-running case against the publisher of the Daily Mail, a fight that had become deeply personal, was thrown out completely. For someone who had built much of his public role around challenging the British press, it was a major blow. Commentators called it one of the worst weeks of his life, with some saying it was even worse than other major lows in his public downfall.
Sunday, we will look at the background behind the verdict, what it means for Prince Harry, and the ongoing...
It got worse. After the court loss, a new palace housing dispute added to the chaos. Reports said Harry's expected arrangements had collapsed, talks had turned sour, and the whole trip was barely holding together. At the same time, the long-running fight over his security returned to the headlines, giving critics more reason to doubt the visit would succeed. Then there was Meghan's absence. She was not seen at any public event, not photographed arriving, and not beside Harry during a week that seemed to be unraveling. That quickly became a major story. Commentators questioned whether she had stayed in California over security fears and whether the planned family reunion had quietly fallen apart before it even began. So Harry appeared to be facing everything alone: a court loss, a palace dispute, a security fight, and Meghan nowhere in sight. By almost every public measure, the trip looked like a failure. Yet outside Chatham House, he gave a thumbs up, joked about the heat, smiled at cameras, kept to his schedule, and appeared completely at ease. That puzzled people. Given everything happening, he did not look shaken at all. One explanation is simple: he stayed disciplined. He refused to give photographers the image of a defeated man. The thumbs up may have been performance, and the smile may have been performance. And the smile may have been protection. Public figures often take bad news in private and reveal nothing in public.
And where once again, he looked like a broken man giving an awkward interview to Alison Hammond of Woke IT.
But there's another way to read it. Maybe Harry was not pretending to stay strong at all. Maybe none of the court loss, housing dispute, or collapse headlines were really affecting him because he already knew something the public did not. His smile was not discipline or self-protection. It was a secret. That secret changed the whole story. While the press speculated that Meghan had skipped the trip and that the family reunion was finished, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet were already entering the UK quietly. There were no public airport photos, no crowds, and no media trail. They used private VIP entry points and moved through Britain without public attention until the palace was ready to confirm it. The family went straight to Highgrove. There, in private and away from cameras, they met with King Charles and Queen Camilla in a meeting almost no one expected. The timing matters. The confirmation came only after the meeting had already happened. That meant no leak, hostile headline, or outside pressure could interfere. By the time the public learned about it, the moment was already over and safely protected. Seen that way, the whole week looks different. Harry was not smiling because he was managing the pressure. He was smiling because he knew what was coming. His courthouse exit, Invictus appearances, and calm reaction to illegal loss all seem less like image control and more like part of a bigger effort to protect one thing: the plan.
So this is a real homecoming for so many of them, with the Birmingham Hospital, Queen Elizabeth Hospital, just all of it.
The family was coming, the meeting was still on, and Harry's main job was to get through the week without upsetting what was being arranged in private. In the end, All the public suspense worked in their favor. Days of headlines asking whether Meghan would ever return to Britain made the reveal far more powerful. A planned visit gets attention, a surprise creates a global story, and once the confirmation came, that is exactly what happened. Harry and Meghan ended up winning the week, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. The court loss, the housing dispute, the security headlines, and Meghan's absence from every public event all helped build the image of a trip in trouble. Then came the turnaround. A family believed to be divided and falling apart quietly arrived at Highgrove and secured the one outcome that made the rest of the week's headlines seem unimportant. The meeting happened. But that raises a bigger question. If this was only a family visit, with a son trying to mend ties and a grandfather wanting to see his grandchildren, why was it hidden so carefully? Why the private airport routes, the silence, until everything was over and the public image of Harry appearing alone while his family stayed completely out of sight? Even royal family visits do not usually involve this level of secrecy. Something made this one different. And to understand that, the key is Meghan's movement through the week. Her actions do not just show where she was. They point to what this trip may really have been about.
Any hopes of Prince Harry returning to the royal family appear to be dashed. The palace was quick to shut down rumours of a royal comeback.
Look at what Meghan did not do that week. She did not appear at court when Harry's legal loss became public. She did not stand beside him for cameras, present a united front, or give the press a photo of them facing trouble together. She skipped every Invictus event, stayed away from public spaces, avoided difficult questions, and gave the media nothing. Then she appeared at Highgrove. That contrast feels deliberate. It was too exact and too well-timed to seem accidental. Meghan showed up for only one moment all week, the private meeting with King Charles. Not the hard moments, not the public ones, and not the risky ones. Only the meeting, the single most valuable moment of the trip. That says a lot about how the Sussexes operate when they are being highly strategic. Public appearances brought risk, hostile crowds, bad photos, and questions she did not want to answer. The private meeting offered only benefits, access to the king, closeness to the monarchy, and a moment that could hold far more long-term value than any public event. That closeness is what matters most. The Sussex brand was never mainly built on Meghan's lifestyle projects, Harry's charity work, or their separate ventures after leaving royal life. Its real value came from one thing: their link to the crown. The closer they are to the royal family, the more relevant they remain. The further away they drift, the faster that value weakens.
The reconciliation between the two men are now dead in the water. It's my understanding that King Charles is furious and...
This week's coverage made one thing clear. Public interest in Harry and Meghan rises and falls with how close they seem to the royal family. The more distant they become, the less attention they hold. That is why a single official photo of King Charles with Archie and Lilibet would be hugely valuable. It would spread worldwide within minutes, shift the story, ease public opinion toward Meghan, and signal peace more strongly than any interview ever could. But no photo was released. That may be the most revealing detail of the week. Not because it proves any deal was kept, but because it suggests the value of that image may be saved for later. Used now, after a tense and messy visit, it would have limited impact. The court loss is still recent. The housing dispute is still unresolved. And the headlines are still negative. Released later, as part of a larger project or documentary at the right moment, that same image could be worth far more. That value was not lost. It was delayed. Meghan seemed to understand that from the start. She appeared only for the one moment that mattered, avoided every risky public setting, and left Britain without giving the press a single image that could be turned against her. That does not look accidental. It looks planned. Even before the family reached Highgrove, the palace had already set firm limits. Reports before Harry's arrival suggested that any private family meeting would come with strict, non-negotiable conditions. The message seemed clear. After everything that had happened before, this time nothing would be left vague. No cameras near the meeting, no Instagram posts, no commercial use of the visit in any form.
King Charles and Queen Camilla have hosted Prince Harry, Meghan Markle and their children Archie and Lilibet at their Highgrove...
The reported rules did not stop at banning cameras, social media posts, or commercial use. They went further. There was to be no later interview in the U.S. where Harry repeated private remarks from Charles, no podcast built around royal family conversations, and no book chapter turning Highgrove into a scene. In short, every route by which private royal moments had previously become public content was being blocked in advance. One reported detail stands out most. Meghan may even have been asked to hand over her devices before any face-to-face meeting. If true, that shows how serious the palace was. This was no longer just about stopping cameras in the room. It was about preventing voice notes, private photos, typed notes, or any material that could stay hidden for months and later appear in a project. The palace's goal seems obvious: stop this meeting from becoming content. That fear did not come from nowhere. Private talks had appeared in books, family moments had turned up in documentaries, and emotional conversations had been retold to global audiences as if only one version mattered. After seeing that happen more than once, the palace appears to have decided that this time every possible gap had to be closed first. Harry, according to reports, personally assured his father that the meeting would remain private and that nothing said in the room would be made public. It was a direct promise from son to father. On paper, the arrangement was simple: a private family visit under strict conditions.
Sussexes are saying this is the Sussex public relations machine, which is ruthless and relentless and never sleeps.
Yeah.
The deal seemed clear. The palace would protect itself, Harry would accept the terms, and everyone would keep the meeting private. But that simple picture quickly became harder to believe. A new detail surfaced almost immediately. A camera crew linked to the Sussex team was reportedly in the UK during the trip. That was not just rumor or hostile gossip. It raised a real question about where the line had been drawn between a private family visit and active content gathering. Harry had promised his father privacy, yet cameras were already nearby. The explanation came fast. The crew, it was said, was there for Invictus, a public charity project that naturally involves media coverage. On the surface, that sounded reasonable. But that was not the real issue. Few people objected to filming for Invictus itself. The bigger concern was the line between what the crew was officially there to record and what it could easily capture once it was following the wider trip. When one crew is present around everything, the gap between charity footage and Sussex content becomes almost impossible to separate. At that point, every moment, meeting, and location is potentially within reach of the camera.
Been reunited, no press allowed there, no international journalists or media coverage for this.
A filming brief may define what a crew is meant to capture, but the people behind the camera still see everything around it. The palace appears to have understood that. That is why the reported rules for the Highgrove meeting were so strict. No cameras on the estate, no filming the meeting, and no crew near Charles or Camilla. Inside those grounds, that line may have held, but the palace's control ended at the property boundary. Once the Sussexes left Highgrove, those conditions no longer applied. Whatever happened after that, wherever they went, and whatever a traveling crew recorded would have fallen outside the limits Charles reportedly set. Harry's promise of privacy may have covered the meeting itself, but not everything around it. Then the issue grew bigger. Reports suggested the filming was also tied to another stop on the trip, not Invictus, and not a public charity event. This was a place with a very different kind of value, one linked not to servicework but to the Sussexes' most emotional and commercially powerful story. At that point, the Invictus explanation no longer fully worked. One version of events is simple. The crew filmed Invictus. The Highgrove meeting stayed private, and both sides kept their boundaries. That is possible, and it may be the version Harry would defend. But there is another possibility. The crew may not have been there only for Invictus. The real prize may never have been footage inside royal grounds at all. The most valuable material from the trip may have been waiting somewhere else entirely.
That King Charles is furious and insulted because Harry took so long to accept the incredible invitation.
There was another location beyond palace control, beyond Charles's conditions, and beyond any promise Harry made inside Highgrove. A place the palace could not protect, but one with even more emotional power than the royal meeting itself. If footage from there ever appeared in a major project, the debate over the Invictus camera crew would suddenly seem minor. That possibility changes the whole trip. For years, Harry's strongest public argument was security. It was hard to challenge because it centered on protecting his wife and children. He repeatedly said Britain was unsafe for Meghan and the children without automatic police protection, and that the risks were serious enough to keep them away for long periods. That claim became the reason for almost everything: Meghan's rare visits, the children's absence from Britain, and why the family could not travel there like any other family. This week, that case looked weaker. Even while security headlines were still dominating coverage, Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet entered Britain, moved through the country, reached Highgrove, and completed the visit. No reported incident happened. No public threat appeared. None of the dangers Harry had long described became visible. The logistics made that point even more clearly. Their movements stayed private, controlled, and out of sight, with no waiting crowds and no public moment that exposed them before they were already secure elsewhere.
Meghan abandons Harry when he needs her most. She always leaves him to fend for himself. She never ever...
The family moved through Britain quietly and without any trouble. For a country Harry had long described as too dangerous for his children, the visit passed without a single public problem. That gap between years of warnings and what actually happened is hard to ignore. It is the kind of detail people will remember the next time security becomes part of the story. A simple question now stands out. If the family could enter Britain, travel privately to Highgrove, and stay safe without the full protection Harry said was essential, then what exactly stopped them from doing this at any time over the past several years? Why were the children kept away for so long if a secure private route was always possible? Security was always Harry's strongest argument because it was difficult to attack without seeming heartless. Few people want to challenge a father speaking about his children's safety, and Harry used that argument through every dispute over visits, housing, protection, and threat levels. But that case is strongest only when the danger remains untested. Once the family comes to Britain, moves around safely, and leaves without incident, the claim is no longer theoretical. This week put it to the test in full public view. That does not mean the argument is gone. Harry can still say this trip required special arrangements that are not available for normal visits, and that one successful journey does not settle the wider issue. He will almost certainly make that case.
Staff wanting this information out there, that he is willing to post his youngest.
But the strongest message was not in any statement. It was in what the public saw. The family came to Britain, moved around, and nothing went wrong. That alone changed the debate. Now set aside Highgrove, the court loss, the camera crew, and the security row, and focus on one key question. Why did the children come? Not Meghan. That part is easier to understand from how she handled the week. But Archie and Lilibet crossed the Atlantic, traveled through Britain in complete privacy, and stayed out of sight during an already complicated trip. That was a major choice. The obvious answer is simple and human. Charles wanted to see his grandchildren, and Harry wanted to make that happen. That explanation makes sense. But then another place entered the story. Althorp, Princess Diana's family estate, where she is buried. In the Sussex story, few places carry more emotional weight. Diana is not only Harry's mother. Her memory sits at the center of the Sussex narrative. Grief, legacy, and the idea of being harmed by the royal institution. Reports suggested the family might visit Althorp during the trip, possibly as a private visit for the children to connect in some way with the grandmother they never knew. On its own, that also sounds natural. Then, one detail changed the tone. Althorp was reportedly closed during that period, an unusual closure for that time of year. And the timing matched the days Harry and Meghan were in Britain.
As you say there, it's been 4 years. The family were last over at the Platinum Jubilee in 2022. They've had...
Think about that. A rare closure at a place with huge personal and public value happening during the exact Sussex visit, while a camera crew was already part of the wider trip. At the same time, reports had been circulating for months about a future project tied to the 30th anniversary of Diana's death. And Netflix still needs content from the Sussexes. Not Invictus footage, not lifestyle shows, not minor California projects. The real value in the Sussex brand has always been the royal story. And one chapter of that story carries more emotional weight than almost anything else. Diana's grandchildren at her grave. Footage like that would be extremely powerful. Not old archive clips, not Harry talking about his mother, but Archie and Lilibet standing at Althorp, the resting place of the grandmother they never met. That is the kind of material that could revive a streaming deal, support a major documentary, and create worldwide attention instantly. That is why some commentators pushed a blunt theory. The children were brought to Britain for a Diana project. In that version, Althorp was always the real goal. But bringing the children to Diana's grave without also seeing the king, without the Highgrove meeting, and without a reconciliation story around it would have looked impossible to defend publicly. So the palace meeting became the main headline. drawing all attention to Highgrove while something else may have mattered just as much behind the scenes.
The palace source described the meeting as a private family occasion and said no pictures, video, or...
In that theory, Highgrove was the headline, but Althorp was the real asset. What makes that idea hard to dismiss is simple. The palace had no control over Althorp. Charles's reported conditions applied only to royal property, the meeting itself, and any direct commercial use of the royal family's involvement. Althorp is different. It belongs to the Spencer family, not the crown. Anything filmed there would sit outside palace authority, outside the Highgrove Agreement, and outside any conditions Charles could enforce. That means the most valuable part of the trip may always have been the one the palace could not control. Now the meeting is over. The family has left Highgrove. The surprise has already hit the news and moved through the headlines. That part is done. What matters now is what happens next. The real test begins after the Sussexes return to California. Not what was said inside Highgrove. Not what Harry promised. What matters is what follows, what appears, what stays hidden, and whether any project later emerges that clearly draws from this week. If nothing leaks, no photo appears, no carefully timed briefing starts selling a reconciliation story, and no commercial project turns this trip into content, then something may truly have changed. In that case, silence itself would be meaningful. It would suggest Harry finally understands the real price of rebuilding trust with his father. But history makes that hard to assume. This would not be the first private agreement, the first promise of silence, or the first time strict conditions were reportedly set, only for selected details to reach the public later.
For that one, to see Meghan and King Charles, Queen Camilla, and the small talk for that exchange.
That is exactly how the trust problem was built. Private moments have too often been followed by carefully helpful briefings, emotional descriptions from unnamed sources, or images that somehow appear just when a project launch or media reset needs them most. Each time the public gets a polished version of a moment no one else was allowed to see. The palace's concern is not theoretical. It comes from a pattern. Private conversations have become public material. Family exchanges have been turned into documentaries. And once those stories reach the public, they often come from only one side, leaving the royal family with almost no safe way to answer. That is why palace aides were likely thinking beyond phones and cameras. Devices can be removed. Crews can be kept off royal property. But conditions cannot control memory. They cannot stop someone from later retelling private words, reshaping emotional moments, or presenting a one-sided version to millions. That is the real risk Charles accepted by allowing the meeting to happen. It also explains why some observers believe the king may have handed the Sussexes exactly what they needed most: renewed royal access, gained in exchange for a promise of silence that history suggests may be difficult to trust. And Althorp still hangs over the story. It remains outside every palace condition, every agreement, and every line drawn around the visit. If footage from there ever appears as part of a documentary or larger project released at the perfect moment, it could redefine what this trip was really about.
Any hopes of Prince Harry returning to the royal family appear to be dashed. The palace was quick to shut down rumours of a royal comeback.
If footage from outside Highgrove ever appears later, it will clash directly with everything that was supposedly promised there. That would be impossible to explain away. What this trip clearly produced was a result neither side may have fully expected. Days of tension, then a dramatic reversal that took over global coverage and drew far more attention than a normal announced visit ever would. Planned or not, Harry and Meghan ended up controlling the story all week. What is known is fairly clear. Harry had a terrible week that still ended with a major win. Meghan stayed away from every difficult public moment and appeared only for the one with the highest value. A camera crew was around during a trip said to be private. Althorp remains outside every palace rule and every reported agreement, and the promise of silence has not yet been tested by time. Everything else remains uncertain: the motive, the real purpose, and whether the week was heartfelt, strategic, or both. That is why the Highgrove meeting may not be the full story. A grandfather seeing his grandchildren does not usually require this much secrecy. Private travel, an embedded camera crew, and another location carrying decades of emotional and commercial weight. A simple family reunion does not need that level of planning. What seems more carefully built was the narrative itself. Harry took repeated public blows and kept smiling. Meghan appeared at exactly the right moment and nowhere else. The palace got its private meeting while the Sussexes regained something with lasting value, visible closeness to the crown, now back in the public record. So the clean answer may be that both things were true at once. The meeting may have been real and emotionally meaningful, but the operation around it may also have been about much more than family alone.
And Lily at Highgrove House, his Gloucestershire country residence. For reaction,
the real test comes later. In the weeks ahead, the truth will likely appear in one of two ways: continued silence or a carefully placed detail from a story that was meant to stay private. When that happens, this entire week will make much more sense. For now, Harry's worst-looking week ended with the one win nobody expected. The family that many thought was finished quietly went into Highgrove and came out with what they needed, but the strict conditions reportedly set by Charles now sit uneasily beside the unexplained presence of a camera crew. And Althorpe, the one place outside every palace rule, boundary, and promise, still hangs over the story. So the final question is simple. Was Harry's smile genuine? Was he protecting a real family moment after years of distance? Or was the whole week something far more strategic? From the calm reaction to the court loss to Meghan's perfectly timed appearance and the children being brought to Britain as part of a larger Diana-linked story. One version ends with healing, the other ends with footage, and the answer will come the moment the silence breaks, because it usually does. It may come through a small leaked detail, a friendly anonymous source, or a project announcement that sounds personal but feels carefully managed. When that happens, the meaning of this week will be clear. Until then, the story is not over. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Every new development in this story is one we'll be following closely, and there's still plenty left to unfold. If the Althorpe connection gave you a different perspective, leave a like and share this video with someone who believes this was simply a grandfather meeting his grandchildren. There may be much more to the story than we've seen so far.